The following is a recovered audio log from the Redacted archives. Enoch's hands were covered in wax, not the clean, honeyed yellow of fresh comb, but something older, the color of old teeth, the color of skin left too long in still water. The candle on the shelf across from him had a face pressed into it. He could see that now. He had not wanted to see it before. The wick was lit. The wax was weeping in long, slow lines down the pale column, and from somewhere inside that soft, rendered thing, from somewhere that was not the room and not the house and not any place he could point to on a road map, a voice was beginning to speak. It was low. It was careful. It was the voice of someone who had waited a very long time to say the thing they were saying. He recognized it. It was his mother's voice. She had been gone 11 years. But we are getting ahead of ourselves. We always do when we are frightened. Enoch Lyle Caudill had been weaving skeps since his grandfather set his small hands on rye straw and taught them the first coil. He was 8 years old then. He was 53 now. And the work had not changed, and neither had his hands, not in any way that mattered. A skep is a hive shaped from twisted grass and stitched together with split briar or bramble, wound upward in a slow spiral, domed at the crown like a loaf, like a sleeping thing, like something that belongs half to the air and half to the earth beneath it. Most folks had long since moved on to wooden boxes with frames you could lift clean and inspect in the full light. Enoch had not. He kept bees the way his grandfather kept them, the way the old people kept them, back before the word beekeeper and the word priest were so far apart as they are today. He lived at the bottom of Hatcher's Holler, in a house that listed slightly to the left, the way old houses do when they have spent enough years thinking about lying down. He kept 12 hives along the side yard and sold his sourwood honey at the market in Clintwood on the 3rd Saturday of every month from May through October. He was a quiet man. His neighbors knew him as the kind of person who lifted a hand from a distance, but did not often close the distance. He was not unfriendly. He was accustomed to bees, and bees do not require you to be anything other than still. The letter arrived on a Tuesday in late September, when the sourwood had gone dry, and the goldenrod had begun browning at the tips, and the air carried that first thin edge that tells you winter is not far off, only walking slow through the high ridges. The letter was written on paper that felt wrong in his hands, not quite rough, not quite smooth, somewhere between the two, in a way that made him want to set it down before he had finished holding it. It smelled of something sweet and deep and older than wood smoke, older than tallow, the kind of smell that lives in the back corners of cellars that have not been opened in a long while. The letter said a woman named Della Fugate of Mallow-Thicket Ridge had a collection of old skeps in need of repair. It said she had been given his name by someone she did not name. It said she would pay him cash money and, in kind, whatever he required, and that the bees in those hives were of a particular sort that did not take easily to strangers and would need his specific patience and skill to manage. At the bottom of the page, in letters smaller than the rest, it said he should come before the first frost or not at all. He read it twice and set it on the table and looked at it while he finished his coffee. He did not know anyone from Mallow-Thicket. It was far enough into the high ridges that the people in the holler below only had a loose sense of it, the way you have a loose sense of a dream from several nights back, something that had trees in it, something that had a sound you couldn't quite place once you were fully awake. He had driven through the near edge of it once, years ago, on a road that kept turning away from him just as he thought he had its measure. He had not stayed. He went anyway. He loaded his tools into the bed of the truck, his coils of rye straw, his awl, his strips of bramble soaking in a bucket, his smoker and his veil and his good leather gloves, and he drove up out of the holler into the yellow September morning. The road to Mallow-Thicket climbed in the way mountain roads sometimes do, not steadily but in lurches, leveling onto flat ridges where the trees pressed close on both shoulders, and then pitching upward again through rock cuts where water seeped down the stone and left long, dark stains that looked, in the slant light, like writing in a language made entirely of verticals. The road crossed a narrow creek twice on bridges made of planks that flexed under the truck's weight and groaned like something that had not been asked to work in some time. On the second crossing he stopped and looked down at the water, which was low and clear and running over flat stone in that particular September way, not rushing, only moving the way time moves in a place where nothing has happened recently enough to hurry it. He sat with the engine idling and listened to the water and to the wind in the high branches above it, which were nearly bare now, the leaves having gone ahead of him up the ridge, carried off by the first cold nights. The creek smelled of iron and wet clay, and the thin perfume of something blooming late and small along the bank that he could not see from where he sat, but could feel in the back of his throat, the way you feel a sound that is almost too low to hear. The sourwood was turned full, and its leaves were a deep bruised red, the color of old wine, the color of a wound going quiet. The sassafras burned orange alongside it. The hickories stood in the yellow of old candle flame. Enoch drove with his window down and breathed the cold morning air, which smelled of leaf rot and creekstone, and somewhere beneath all of it, faintly, sweetly, something that made the back of his jaw ache the way it does when you smell honey warming slow in a pot. Della Fugate's place sat at the end of a lane that was barely a lane, two ruts pressed into the yellowed grass by whatever traffic had passed before. The house was older than the letter had suggested. The porch was deep and cool in shadow, even in the morning light. Along the far side of the yard, on low wooden stands, stood 7 skeps, and even from inside the truck, before he had opened the door, Enoch could see that something about them was not right, though he could not have said clearly what. They were intact, or they appeared to be. They had not collapsed or come apart, but they sat heavy, the way a thing sits when it is holding more than its shape should allow. Mallow-Thicket came out onto the porch before he had finished pulling in. She was a small woman in a dark dress and a poke bonnet that he had not expected to see on a living person, having last seen one on a woman in an old photograph his grandmother kept on the mantel. She moved with the deliberate slowness of someone who has come to understand that hurry is for people who have not yet figured out where everything is going. She smiled at him from the shadow of the porch. She said, "Welcome, Enoch Caudill. We are glad you came." He noticed she said "we." He got out of the truck and shook her hand, which was small and dry and very cool, and she led him around the side of the house toward the yard where the skeps waited. And as he came near them, the wrongness he had noticed from the truck became something he could no longer push aside. There was no sound. Not the low working drone of a healthy colony, not the soft collective hum that a good hive makes when you bring your ear close in the warm months, that sound like a distant mill or a creak heard through a wall. There was nothing. Or rather, there was something, but it was below what the ear could properly catch. It lived in the space behind his back teeth, in the soft place under his tongue, a vibration that was nearly language, that kept almost arranging itself into words and then dissolving before the meaning settled, the way a voice sounds when it comes through many closed doors. He held his palm near the entrance of the nearest skep, not touching it, only near it. The vibration moved against his hand like breath. "They are listening," Mallow-Thicket said beside him. "They always listen first." He asked what they collected, since the season was gone and there was little nectar left. She told him pleasantly, the way you tell someone the hour of the day, that the bees collected what was offered at the end. She said that some folk, when they are going, have a great deal left in them they never got to say. She said the bees carry it home. She said the wax holds it. He did not ask her to say more. He was not sure he could have built the question. He worked through the morning and into the afternoon, repairing each skep in turn, his hands doing what his hands had always known how to do, while the rest of him was occupied with the sounds that were not sounds, with the weight of waiting that sat over the yard the way low clouds sit over a ridge before snow. The bees moved around him, but not the way bees move. They did not spiral and dodge and hurry from flower to flower. They moved the way smoke moves when the air is still, slow and deliberate. And when they settled on his gloves, he could feel, through the leather, a warmth against his palms that was almost a voice pressed small and patient into the hide. He watched one of them settle on the back of his wrist between the glove's cuff and his sleeve, where a strip of bare skin showed. It did not sting, it only rested there, and its stillness was not the stillness of a thing deciding. It was the stillness of a thing that had already decided, long before he arrived, and was only now completing what had been set in motion. Della Fugate brought him something warm to drink around midday. He drank it without examining it first, which was not like him. It tasted of sourwood and something else, something deep and mineral that coated the inside of his mouth and stayed. In the late afternoon, she invited him inside to see the candles. That was where he should have said no. He did not say no. He followed her through the low door into the front room, which smelled of warm wax and cold stone and something beneath that he could not name. The shelves ran the full length of every wall, and on them stood candles, dozens of them, scores of them, each one a pale column of different height and thickness, and each one, when he let his eyes find their focus in the dim light of the room, had something pressed into its surface, not carved, not painted, pressed, something with the general suggestion of a face without being a face, the way a sleeping person's face is almost not a face, the features softened and inward, holding something behind the stillness. He leaned toward one without meaning to, the way you lean toward a whisper, the way your body moves toward a sound before your mind has agreed to it. The surface of the wax was not smooth as poured wax ought to be. It was faintly textured, faintly warm to the near presence of his hand, and the impression in its side held the suggestion of closed eyes, of a mouth slightly parted, of something that had settled into itself the way a face settles in the final hour. He looked along the shelf and counted without wanting to count. There were more than he could finish counting. Some were nearly burned away, low stumps of pale wax with their faces half dissolved, the features running down into the candle holder in slow tributaries, the mouth going last, always the mouth going last. He stood very still. She said the wax came from the hives. She said it held what the bees brought home. She said you could hear them if you lit one. He looked down at his hands. They were covered in wax, not the clean, honeyed yellow of fresh comb, but something older, the color of old teeth, the color of skin left too long in still water. She lit a candle on the shelf nearest to him. The flame caught and held, and the wax began to weep. And from inside that pale column, from somewhere that was not the room and not the house, a voice began to speak, low, careful, patient. The voice of someone who had held something inside for a very long time and had finally been given somewhere to put it. It was his mother's voice. He stood in that room for a long time after that, or what felt like a long time. Time in Mallow-Thicket moved the way those bees moved, not in a line, not in a hurry, but pooling and drifting, collecting in the low places. He could not have said what she spoke about. He could not have repeated it afterward. But he stood and he received it, the way ground receives rain, the way an old stone wall receives the cold. And when the candle had wept itself down to the halfway mark, the voice began to soften at its edges, and he understood without being told that the wax was running thin over what it held, that the sound and the shape of her were being given slowly back to the air. He did not try to stop it. He found he did not want to. There was a rightness to the release that he had not expected and could not explain. Della Fugate said, "She left so much behind. They nearly always do." He asked what happened to him now. She smiled the same slow smile she had given him from the porch, and she said he would stay. He would learn the work. She said it pleasantly, the way you tell a weary traveler the spare room is made up, the way you say, "Come in out of the cold. The fire is already lit." She said when he had listened long enough, when he was full enough, the bees would know what to do with everything he carried. He thought about the truck out front. He thought about the road back down through the red sourwood and the orange sassafras. He thought about his 12 hives waiting at the bottom of Hatcher's Holler with no one to tend them through the winter. He thought, someone will need to do that. He found, in a way that surprised him, that his coat was already on the hook by the door, that the cup was being refilled without his asking. Outside the single window, the light was going the color of old beeswax, amber and slow and dimming, and the 7 skeps in the yard sat patient in the last of it, heavy and waiting. He would write the letter tomorrow. That was what he told himself. He would write to whoever needed knowing, and then he would begin to learn the work. And in time, the bees would tell him what came next. He sat down in the chair beside the cold hearth. He waited. Outside in the still amber yard, the bees were already listening.